Hey, Joe Roberts from the Push for Change. We're on what day are we on?
123.
123. Behind me is a whole pile of corn. Now, if I was to ask you to describe corn, I'd say, well, it's corn. You know, it's pretty easy to describe, pretty easy to define. It's corn or it's not corn. Now, I'm sure if you're a corn farmer, there's multiple different species and all kinds of details about corn, but still, corn is corn. And one of the things that's been really interesting about Atlantic Canada and rural parts of the country when we're talking about youth homelessness is there's a misconception around what youth homelessness is and what it isn't. In Atlantic Canada and rural parts of the country, you don't see people sitting on a piece of cardboard in front of the liquor store, so there's a misnomer that we don't have youth homelessness. When I was in Charlottetown, I met a young girl at the Salvation Army. I went there to say a few words, and she was 8.5 months pregnant. And she was about 22 years old, and she was couch surfing. And I said to her, are you homeless? She says, no, I'm not homeless. And I said, but do you have stable and adequate housing? And she goes, no. And I said, how secure do you feel about having this baby in a couple of weeks? And she said, not very. Fortunately for us, we've got some smart people who have been thinking about this, and they shared the Canadian definition of youth homelessness. And one of those partners that we have is the Canadian Observatory on Homelessness. And so this came out earlier this year, and youth homelessness is defined, it refers to a situation and experience of young people between the ages of 13 and 24 who are living independently of parents and or caregivers, but do not have the means or ability to acquire stable, safe, and consistent residence. Now, why is that important? It's so important for us to clearly define what the problem is so that we can begin to address and create policy around it. As I think back to that young woman who by now she's a mom, I think about how unstable her life and possibly her child's environment is. Destigmatizing the issue of youth homelessness is absolutely key, and so defining what youth homelessness is very important for us to do. Because when we take a penetrating view of what youth homelessness is and what it's not, we begin to understand the issues that actually create the environment where youth homelessness exists. And those things like mental health, addictions, poverty, early childhood trauma. So we're not talking about bad kids, we're talking about bad environments. And so it's really key that we begin to understand what the issue is. In rural parts of the country, I've had a lot of discussion about the invisible homelessness, and this is things like couch surfing. We know in Ontario over 60% or more of young people who experience street involvement do so because of family conflict. They simply can't live at home. They get into a fight with their parents and they find themselves couch surfing. And then at that crucial crossroads is where all kinds of negative life experiences can happen, and those can carry on into adulthood and lead to chronic homelessness. So understanding what youth homelessness is. The definition goes on to say a number of other things. I'd encourage you to go to the Homeless Hub and sign up to the newsletter and check it out. But the last piece really resonates with me. It says youth homelessness is the denial of the basic human rights, and once identified as such, it must be remedied. All young people have the right to the essentials of life, including adequate housing, food, safety, education, and justice. So that's our thought for day 123.